Hello, this is Wmpyr. Here to talk about, well, you might be going, you're here to talk about Wing Chun. Actually, I'm here to talk about um, ancient fencing. My student is working on combining fencing with Escrima, and we're talking about modern day fencing, and also he's studying ancient fencing as well. He's actually going to modern day fencing classes, but he has some books on ancient fencing. Uh, so this is what he's trying to do, and I figure like to help him out, and this is also an area that's important to me as well because it's a very interesting thought since Escrima, Kali Arnis, Kia, already comes from a background that has a lot of influence from fencing, and more specifically, this ancient form of fencing is called espada y daga, the sword and dagger. Um, but he is trying to uncover that, and I believe he's, kind of following in my footsteps in that sense because I told him, hey, if you could study fencing, you should, and he is, and yeah, so he's doing this in his own way, and so I want to show support there. Anyway, when you're thinking like this, I think the most important thing is you got to start with the basics. You got to simplify and ask yourself, what is the most basic way to fight in this manner in combat? How do you do it? And I believe with this ancient combat, the spear really cannot be denied. So we always fall back on the spear. When I have a doubt with anything, I always look back to the spear. That's what I'm discovering in recent times. So I look to the spear, and when we're talking about the spear, is you stab and you dodge. And the stab is more like a jab, right? It's not a thrust. This You got to keep it safe. A thrust is way more committed. So this is just a jab, okay? So you're jabbing with the spear, and you got to assume they're going to be doing the same right back at you. So you got to be dodging that. And one of the instructors that I've been talking to, he said, "Yeah, that's a basic way of combat, but that's also like the lowest form. Like that, there's nothing like skillful about that," is what he said. And I absolutely agree that it's like the lowest skill, right? And in that manner of combat, you could do it with some swords. You can't do it with all swords. And it depends on the weapon, of course. Some weapons are way too heavy to be doing this kind of combat, so then you have to change it. But if you can, you're always going to resort to this kind of combat, which is the spear based. And when you're doing that, there are more high tech techniques. Of course there are. I am not a spear fighting expert, but I can understand that it definitely exists. And anyway, when I look to the Filipino martial arts of Kia, Kali, Escrima, Arnis, um, when I look at our long range of combat, which some call largo mano or larga mano, you look at that, that's our long range. They're not really doing the spear. kind of attack, the jab kind of attack. They're making these long slashes. It's the same stuff that we do in normal Kia, but they're just doing it with much bigger motions. And I thought to myself, well, that's weird, because if they fought against someone that was doing the spear, they would lose. They would lose. And that doesn't make sense. And I would think that the Filipinos that developed Escrima knew this. And in fact, they say that, yes, while Filipino martial arts, Kia especially, has a very strong influence from Spanish fencing, it also has a very strong influence from Silat and also Kung Fu. And Silat has a strong influence from Kung Fu, or we could say that Silat comes from Kung Fu. So either way, Kia, Escrima, has a very, very, very strong influence from Kung Fu. And in Kung Fu, they revered the spear. So it just doesn't make sense. You think that they would have passed this on to the Filipinos and the Filipinos understood this. So I'm willing to bet that they totally understood this. So then why in the long range fighting of Escrima do we not really do the spear? And I'm guessing, we have to think of the difference. What's the difference? Well, the spear attack, the jab attack that I'm talking about, is very quick. It's rapid. It's fast. It's non-committed. When you're making huge motions, slashing, that's very committed, very powerful. So that's the difference to me. Correction, I don't want people to misunderstand. When I said very committed, it's much more committed compared to the spear jab attack. Okay, so let me just say that. So then it tells me that the largo mano is actually entry into closer range, medium range and close range, because that's where you need power. In long range, you need speed. If you're going to stay in long range, you'd be using speed. But if you're going to move into a closer range, you're going to be coming in with power. So then that tells me that what they're doing in largo mano is actually, you may start off in long range, that's why the big movements, but the big follow through equals power, therefore you're moving into a closer range. So it's starting from long range and going into closer range. So that's the difference. And once I'm able to think that way, it makes total sense to me. And a prime example of that is boxing and MMA. If you look at MMA, the combat sport of MMA, compared to boxing, their punches, because in MMA they do have boxing techniques in there, because every MMA fighter studies boxing, you have to. But their punches are a lot more bigger. It's different from conventional boxing. It's much, much bigger swing. And if you look at conventional boxing, it's a lot tighter, it's more compact, it's a lot quicker. So it's the same, to me, it's the same thing. Conventional boxer is closer to what I call the jab spear attack. And the MMA fighters is now more like largo mano, where they're swinging big time. Well, that's because in MMA, you're going to go into the clinch, you're going to go to the ground. So you're going to get very close, much, much closer combat in MMA. And in conventional boxing, the rules forbid that. In the clinch, you're severely limited, and the ground's not even allowed. So, it makes sense once again. So now going back to why do I have Wing Chun on here? Is because I said within the spear fighting, there's higher technique. Okay, much higher technique. And if you look at, I believe they call him Master Wong from YouTube. If you look at what he's doing right here, he's off form. I wish there was a better photo that I could have showed you guys. But his left hand would be the daga, the dagger, and the right hand would be the spear. He would be punching him right now. So it's a simultaneous block and punch. He would be doing that. Right here, you can't see that, but it would have been. It's because he's talking. He's in mid-talk right there. But he would have been. So that would be espada y daga right there. So that would be a higher technique than just jab with the spear, move out of the way. Jab and dodge, jab and dodge. This would be much, much higher technique. Okay. An even higher technique would be right below that, the center middle, where you see it says Fuk Sao, Tan Sao, Wu Sao, and center punch, Bong Sao. Okay. So those techniques is one-handed. So it's not espada y daga, it's just a sword. Okay. Or it's just a spear. And those techniques would be much, much more difficult than espada y daga, because with espada y daga, you get two hands. With this, you can only do it with one. So in here, if you're doing the form correctly, with one hand, if the other person were to extend their attack, it should miss you. So your hand put them offline. They talk about center line. Well, you just thwarted their attack. So if they extended their attack, it's going to miss you. But if you, from the way you blocked, if you extend your hand, you should be able to hit them. So that's a much harder technique to do. But so I'm just saying that it exists. Higher technique with the spear does exist, not just the jab and dodge. So it is there if you want to go deeper in there. There's I'm not a spear fighter once again, but this to me is obvious. And then if you look at this right here, the way in Wing Chun, the way you start, by how you start when you put your hands with the other, when you touch hands with the opponent, from right there in the training they do this. You could put your hand on top, you could put your hand on the inside, you could put your hand on the outside, you could put your hand on the bottom. That those kinds of formations already, to me, is just like engaging. When you have fencing, when you're engaging sword to sword, you're going to do that. Are you on the top, coming from the top? Are you coming from the bottom? Are you coming from the inside? Are you coming from the outside? And then from there, you're trying to thwart their attack while making yours count. So to me, Wing Chun is actually, I know people say Wing Chun is a close range combat style. I can see why Bruce Lee made sense with this and fencing, and he actually tied it together with fencing. And that's funny because fencing is a long range style. So then that tells me Wing Chun is actually, it incorporates further like fencing concepts. So it's longer range, and it also has the closer range stuff. So it's kind of a complete art, whereas I used to think Wing Chun wasn't a complete art. It's missing a lot of things. It's really just a close range, destroy the person in close range art. But no, I don't think so anymore. It really has strong ties with the fencing, with the spear, and so then it makes sense to me that they do train with like a staff, like a longer staff type of, not just the butterfly swords. But anyway, I hope you guys found this interesting. That's it for now. This is just me linking a bunch of styles together, trying to understand my own style, doing the style within the style type of thing. That's it for now. Thank you for listening, and take care, folks.